The Trump administration has blocked entry into the US for migrants and refugees already given clearance to settle in America. Around 10,000 will not be allowed to board their scheduled flights. As Donald Trump follows through on his promises to crack down on illegal migration, federal agents are also preparing raids in cities with high numbers of undocumented migrants. Immigrant communities fear the more aggressive rhetoric coming from the White House will increase hostility against them.
The newest executive orders from Washington have quickly and drastically changed things at the US-Mexican border. On the US side, movement noticeably quieted down.
I've noticed that there is less people. I mean, as you can tell, there's usually lots of people lined up here, across the street, and then the vans, of course, that transport them. And there's nothing today.
The bridge is empty. There's no one in there.
Across the country, people are alarmed about the new president's policies and the implications they will have on immigrant communities.
I'm a child of immigrants myself. My family comes from Chihuahua, Mexico. I grew up in these communities. I know I'm integrally tied to the community that is being affected by all of the policies that are as xenophobic and very anti-immigrant in this current state.
Trump has received criticism from non-governmental organisations as well as religious leaders. At a prayer service in Washington on his second day in office, the bishop appealed to him directly.
But the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here.
Some of Trump's executive orders are already facing court challenges. For instance, 24 Democratic-led states and cities filed a lawsuit against the president's bid to end birthright citizenship. Trump's new policies go, however, beyond targeting citizenship rights. They mean the military will be positioned at the US-Mexican border and instruct authorities to shut down asylum and refugee admissions, painting an even grimmer picture for those trying to enter.
DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez Gruber is in the border city of El Paso in Texas. Benjamin, Trump has started his crackdown on immigration. Are you seeing the effects of that on the ground yet?
We asked those who are working with migrants, with NGOs here, and we asked a man who is now working at a shelter what has changed over the last 2-3 days of this new administration, and he said that everything changed when you look at the numbers of people who crossed the bridge that you can see here right behind me, connecting El Paso in the US with Ciudad Juarez on the Mexican side. He said that every day there were around 250 to 300 people crossing every day, and that number went now down to around 20. The last bigger group that managed to get into the US. That happened on Monday in 6 a.m. before this app was shut down that allowed migrants to tell the US government that they intended to cross into this country.
Now, as you said, you've been meeting with representatives of NGOs that look after migrants in El Paso. How are these NGOs preparing for what's to come?
It's hard for them to actually prepare, not knowing what the policies will be. There have been many promises. We have seen them across several of the ministries of this new administration, but we spoke to a woman working with an NGO here that's called Hope, and she said that what they're doing now is primarily giving information, so informing migrants about their rights, also what happens with these rates now that this new policy was overturned, that will now allow ISO, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to actually get these deportations also closer to schools and also to churches. That was something that was not allowed during the previous administration. So they said the most important part is actually informing them about their rights, especially of those family members, where some are US citizens and some are here without their paperwork.
Now, Benjamin, this crackdown is happening across government departments. Talk to us about some of the changes that are already underway and palpable.
That's right, Gerhard. We're getting information from several departments. So on one side, we have sources within the Department of Defense saying that up to 1,500 active duty U.S. soldiers are being deployed to the border with Mexico. So that's one thing. Here in Texas, we have an operation called Lone Star Operation that's headed by the Texas National Guard. So there are already soldiers deployed, but people think, and also those working with migrants, is that they might extend it to other states that are bordering with Mexico. That's one thing. Then we have the State Department saying that they would cancel trips for refugees that already were vetted by the US government, were already allowed entry to the United States ahead of a deadline that was now on the 27th of January. That will also affect a lot of Afghan refugees who were already approved to come to the United States. And just to mention one more, there was information by the Department of Justice, the DOJ, a memo threatening local and state officials in case if they don't comply with these new policies of this new administration that made migration and also working on irregular migration one of its main campaign promises. And we see that they're starting with those policies on the first and second day of this new administration.
DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez Gruber there, reporting from El Paso at the border between the US and Mexico. Thank you very much, Benjamin.